Brian's going to lead us with a word of prayer this morning to start us off.
Dear Father, we thank you for this morning, and thank you for the time that we have to worship you and to be in your presence. And Father, help us to show you the respect that you deserve, and help us to love others the way that you have loved us. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, Brian's been after me for a while to teach a class, so I finally succumbed. And I was thinking about, what I wanted to visit about, and I got to thinking about things that used to bother me when I was, back when I was in college. As you know, most of y'all know that I'm a geologist, and I went to ACU to be a vet. That's where I started out. And between my freshman and sophomore years, I got a job roughnecking. And while I was there, I was the one that caught the samples, and I thought it was so cool to be able to see rocks 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet down in the ground that no other person had ever seen. And I got to meet a few geologists that explained to me how that got there and what kind of deposit was. And it just was so intriguing to me. I just kind of fell in love with it. So I decided to go back my sophomore year and take a few geology courses. And I did, and really liked it, so I decided that I was going to change my major and become a geologist. Well, when I went into my first physical geology class, we started right off the bat. My classes were at Hardin-Simmons, and I took everything else at ACU, so I was in a Christian environment in both places. And
yeah, but Baptist doesn't count.
Well, that's true.
That's just a Methodist that can read.
That's perfect. But I wasn't totally in a completely atheistic surrounding like at some major university, So we got into geology classes, and the professor started talking about the Big Bang. He started talking about years that it took for creation to be had, and then he started talking about dinosaurs. And I remember to this very day, I remember the specific morning when he started talking about dinosaurs, and I remember my whole face getting flushed red, and I was not embarrassed, but just, I don't know, I felt kind of ashamed and blasphemous, because I grew up in Throckmorton in a super conservative environment. Bible classes, went to church 3 days a week, about 3 times a week, and we were pounded when I was growing up. I remember when the first Big Bang started coming out. I was like junior high or something like that, and you just didn't mention Big Bang because Big Bang just didn't happen in my house. Things happened like this. It was a snap of a finger, and it was all put into place. And thinking about the Big Bang was blasphemous. The same way with 24-hour days of creation. It happened in a 24-hour day, and that's the way it was, and it all happened within 1 week, and God snapped his finger like a magician, and things came about. But the biggest thing that got me was dinosaurs, and where did dinosaurs fit into the whole creation pattern, and where were they in relationship to man, and where were they in relationship to mammals and things that we see here on Earth today? And I just could not put it all together, and it was so confusing. And, I just really struggled with my faith for my first 2 years of geology classes, because I just couldn't figure out how what I had been taught for 18 years so conservatively and whatnot in a Christian environment in Throckmorton versus what I was now being taught at a Christian university in science classes about dinosaurs and the Big Bang and stuff, and I just struggled a lot. So with that thought in mind, I thought, well, maybe I could lead a class and we can discuss maybe some of your thoughts and your views and troubles that maybe you've had with some of these ideas, because I really struggled with it a lot. It was hard for me, and so that was why I decided I wanted to give a talk about the Creation Week and maybe help strengthen your thoughts and your ideas. And I think when we know more about how things were done, it puts us maybe our relationship closer to God, and maybe strengthens your faith just a little bit. So with that thought in mind, you can see the way I was thinking and progressing. And I graduated, we got married, we moved to Throckmorton. And about the time that we started to leave Throckmorton after about 6 years, the church started getting a publication called Does God Exist? And it was written by a guy named Dr. John Clayton. Well, it really appealed to me being a geologist because what he has spent his life doing is trying to convince everybody that there is a God, that he really does exist, and that science and the Bible don't conflict each other, but actually have a symbiotic relationship with each other. And they complement each other in all ways throughout the Bible. And he's devoted most of his life to this. So that really spoke to me. And the first couple of publications he got, it used to come once a month, now it's every 2 months. It just spoke to me, so I just dove into it and enveloped myself in that and couldn't wait for each publication. And I've been reading it for 30 some odd years now. And so I've kind of had this relationship with John Clayton, even though I'd never met the man. Was just so respectful of what he knew and what he had done. And the main reason is because John grew up as an atheist. And he grew up as a staunch atheist. I mean, hardcore atheist. He had 2 brothers and a mom and dad, and his grandparents on both sides were atheists. And man, he was really anti-God and everything, and thought it was the silliest thing in the world. And I'm going to read you something that he described as what an atheist view was. People can do as they please without any eternal consequences. The idea that I am deserving of hell because of sin is a lie meant to make me a slave to those in power. The more you have, the happier you will be. Our existence has no grand meaning or purpose. In a world with no God, there is freedom to be who I want to be. Without God, everything is fine. It is ridiculous to think that I am lost and in need of saving. So that's how an atheist thinks. It's all about them. You take care of yourself and you don't worry about other people. And God has it's just a farce. So, you realize what kind of person was in now. He's up in his 20s, and he's at college. And he is super smart. He's getting a doctorate in geology and in physics both. And he's towards the end of his education, and he's in his doctorate program. And he meets this girl named Phyllis. And Phyllis now grows up in the Church of Christ. And she has a background a lot like mine. Troy, I think you're probably in the same boat I am there in Breckenridge. We went to church there for many years. I know it's very similar. So you know what I'm talking about. So he meets Phyllis, who's this very conservative Church of Christ girl. And they go out on a couple of dates, and she finally figures out that he's an atheist. And on the 3rd date, she said, I can't see you anymore. Don't call me. We're not seeing each other. This is done. My parents would kill me. You don't have anything to do with God, and he's everything to me, Well, that just made him so mad he couldn't stand it. He had never heard anybody ever say something like that to him before. So they separated, and it was time for him to write his college thesis, and he decided that he was going to write his thesis and prove that the Bible was wrong, that by science, that he knew with physics and geology, that he could prove that the Bible was wrong. And he was going to be vindictive and go back and show her that you were wrong, you missed out on me, and your family is done. And that this is ridiculous, your way of thinking. So that's what he set out to do. So he spent the next couple of years trying to prove the Bible wrong scientifically by writing his college doctorate thesis. And so the first thing that he did was he learned Hebrew. He taught himself Hebrew, because he wanted to know what the true interpretation of the original words were, and not what some priests and rabbis put together in the King James Version and told us what it said. He wanted to make his own interpretation, so he took the time for the first 6 months to learn Hebrew and learn the meaning of the words so that he could interpret Genesis himself and use those words to figure out what it was saying. So, after about a year and a half or so, and doing all these different experiments and all this study to try to prove the Bible wrong, what he ended up doing, making a long story short, is proving that the Bible was right. Not in one single instance over a period of almost 2 years, in every single subject that he addressed in the Bible, could he prove it wrong scientifically. And it blew him away. So, after this amount of time, and he finished his thesis, got an A on it, he was truly convinced that there was a God and that he had been wrong his whole life. His family was wrong, and that he was wrong, and he has a big ego. I can tell you that after meeting him. And that was something that I think was really, really hard for him to come to terms with, was that that he was wrong. Of course, it's hard for a male to admit that anyway, but he was totally wrong. And so he calls up Phyllis, and says, hey, I got a surprise for you. She said, what are you doing calling me? I told you don't ever call me again. I'm not going to see you. Don't talk to me. He said, no, wait, before you hang up. I want you to know that I got baptized. And he kind of told the whole story of what he had been doing the last couple of years. And he said, I was so intrigued with you, and I love you, and you're the person that I want to be with. So I did this to prove you and your family wrong, but actually what I did was I proved to myself that God is real. So they ended up getting married, and he went on to teach. He was a college professor at Indiana State University as a geology professor, and taught some physics, and then he started this God Exists, I don't know what you call it, a campaign or whatever it is that you call that. And so he quit teaching college and became a high school science teacher, physics teacher, so that he could devote most of his time to this God Exists campaign that we still get, and I think the church here still gets it monthly, and I still get the monthly publication. And he's been all over the world, all over the United States, giving presentations and talks and stuff like that. And he's somewhat famous in those circles because of his staunch atheism and becoming a big-time Christian. So, I say that to say that this past fall, for the last 25 years, every year in these publications that I get, they've advertised this trip to go to the Canyonlands out in Arizona and Utah. And you go to Zion and Bryce Canyon and the Grand Canyon, the Meteor Crater, and 4 or 5 of those different places, and you spend a whole week together, and he leads this field trip out there. So we've been doing this for like 25 years, and this past year was his last one that he was ever going to do. He's 80 years old now, and I got to go on it with like 30 or 40 other people, and I was the very last one that I got the very last spot because I was pumped. So I got to go out there, and I met John and spent a week with him. We had several meals together, one-on-one, and had a lot of time to spend together and visit, and it was just so inspiring for me because of my background and you know what I was interested in. And he's a great person, extremely intelligent, almost to the point that it's intimidating, you know. But we spent the week talking about creation, geology, how things relate to the Bible, and kind of put everything together. So while it was a little bit still somewhat fresh on my mind, I thought I would share this with you guys to help you maybe understand a little bit better about the creation week and how things came to be and the timelines that were involved and such like that. So that's kind of the whole reason that we're going to discuss this. So we're going to talk about the whole creation week. This is going to be a lesson over the next several weeks about the creation week, and we're going to go through Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and talk about that. Let's see where I'm at here. There's 2 things that I do want to say before we really get started in this. Number one is, don't be offended by anything that we talk about. everything that we're going to discuss in the next several weeks is not a salvation question. It's not going to send you to heaven. It's not going to send you to hell. It makes no difference if you disagree with me 100% or if I disagree with you. It makes no difference. We're not here to argue or get upset about this subject matter because it's not going to send you to hell one way or the other. So let's don't get a bee in our bonnet and burned our saddle about something that somebody says in here and get defensive and get upset because it's not the way you think or the way that you were taught and that we're being blasphemous or like that, because it's not a salvation thing. It's just to strengthen our faith in God and give us a good foundation on why we believe what we believe. The one thing that we have to realize when we go through and read Genesis is that Moses wrote this in 1400 BC, 1445 BC. So you have to remember who Moses was writing this to, why he was writing it, and, how would it have been understood at the time, what was their level of understanding, what was their level of education. You have to know that by the words that are being used in Genesis. If you have to understand their cultural background at the time it was being written so that they could understand it, At the time, nobody, of course, was upset because they didn't know. And I want to tell you, there was one Sunday here about 6 years after we moved here to Graham. One Sunday morning in Bible class over here in the auditorium, Dorman was talking about something about the creation week and 24-hour days. I don't even remember exactly what was said, but I made a comment about how the days really weren't 24 hours, so to speak, and kind of gave a little small spiel about that, and lasted a minute. That was it, just a quick answer. But right after Bible class was over with, I was walking out, and just inside the doors in the foyer, one of the guy met me, and his face was red, and he was mad. Let me tell you, he got up in my face with a pointed finger and said, "Don't you ever breathe a word of that again. What you're talking about is blasphemous. It happened 24 hours, it was a day, and he just went off on me and threw a fit." And I just stood there like, dude, there's no sense in being that way, Okay, you disagree, but don't lose your do over it, Good night. It's not that big deal. So I just want to make sure that nobody, goes down that road, because there's really no sense in it. I'm telling you, I think he would have punched me if it had been outside.
You stayed way in the
He was
foyer.
correct.
Keep on talking, but I'm moving closer to the auditorium.
So when you realize, we're going to realize how long God prepared the earth for us. And when you look at what he's done and how long he's taken to perfect the perfect environment for us to live in, it just shows us how much God cares and, what a priority we are to him and how much he really cares for us. I mean, you really got to look at that whole picture there. And, we're not just, a slug, a frog, a snake. I mean, what he has done for us is amazing. And that's some of what we're going to understand. Something else I want you to know is that, to me, understanding the methods, because I had a problem with this, understanding the methods by which God did things doesn't make us blasphemous. It doesn't make us sinful. It doesn't make us wrong to know how God might have done something. You know what I mean? Because when I was growing up, you just didn't question those things. You didn't talk about those things. And I think that's a lot of reason why we don't know some of the things that we're going to discuss is because you just didn't talk about those things. And I think some of the people that were in position to talk about those things didn't have enough knowledge to discuss those things as well. You know what I mean? But that was one thing that I had a hard time with in college is that, gosh, can I even be thinking about this? Can I actually even entertain this thought without being blasphemous and
We didn't talk about it because you would get what you got. That's,
over there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's why nobody talked about it, and that's why,
And I think that's still why some of it's not talked
Yeah.
about, you know?
Yeah.
Because there's some people gonna get really upset. And I'm sure that I'll probably have to do these lessons to that older crowd over there, and I'm sure I'm gonna be attacked by a few people. Which is fine, it doesn't bother me, but people get really upset about something.
It's so crazy how people's culture, or whatever you want to call it, how they were brought up or what have been trained to believe, is so strongly ingrained in their consciousness when
I'm telling
there's
you.
physical, actual,
Evidence to the
samples
contrary.
under the earth that proves, the things that Randy's about to teach us, versus just what you've been told your whole life, and don't you dare go against what I've been told my whole life. And so I just find that so fascinating that people, even when there's, just like John Clayton, he was an atheist, and probably because that's the way he was brought up his whole life.
Absolutely.
But then when he started looking at actual physical evidence and actual facts, he converted himself because the facts spoke for themselves, and God created everything, and the facts are all right there under the ground.
They
So
are. And I know not everybody's scientific, and it doesn't interest everybody. But for some reason, God gave me this passion, and He gave me this desire to want to know about those kind of things. And I realize it's not everybody's cup of tea, and so not everybody's that interested. But it really it has been something for me since I was beginning in college. Also, when we go through Genesis here, you can see a lot of it's written in a very simplistic, plain way. And I think when you compare it then to what we know now, God knew when He was writing that through Moses that we would have a level of knowledge and understanding in the future several thousand years away, because He knows that we would have the technology and the understanding to understand and put two and two together and figure out what exactly it was He wanted. But there's no way He could have put that all in words. I mean, you'd take a forklift to lift your Bible if He put it all into words and described all of it, and what He did and how He did it. And it's not necessary. It's not necessary for our salvation. But I think he knew that in the future we were going to have the intelligence to have an understanding and to be able to put it all together and to figure out what it is that He really wants us to know then. But at the time, when it was written, people just didn't have the mental capacity, the education, the background, or the culture to understand immense timelines. They were just very simple shepherds and women at home making food for their shepherd husbands to come home to. It was just a very simple life, They didn't have the capacity to understand the long timelines, and they didn't have the mental capacity or the understanding of dinosaurs. They're in their simple world, if you think back and put yourself there, what would they have done with a dinosaur? Where would that have fit in their mental capacity? They didn't even see that many animals, different animals, living where they lived in the Jerusalem, Israel, Egypt area, desolate. That hasn't changed much in several thousand years, the environment over there. So, what would they have done with dinosaurs in their mind? They didn't get to see a lot of different kind of animals anyway, and then to throw something crazy like that at them would have just blown their mind. God would have gotten them plumb off track. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of wade our way through the creation story in chapters 1 and 2, and we're going to look at, when the actual creation week started, what was created, what was made from creation, and the processes that were involved in, and how long all that took. And then most importantly, or not most importantly, but very importantly in this whole thing is where did the dinosaurs fit in during the creation week? And we're going to discuss that in detail. And I think that'll kind of help you put everything together and kind of by the time we get to the end of creation week, you can go, oh, I see how it all fits together. Because what I'm going to tell you scientifically meshes perfect with the Bible. And the first time that I saw it, it blew my mind. Because I thought that the progression of the creation week that we're taught when we're going to Sunday school and everything, you know, about the fishes and then the mammals and then people and, you know, and when I was in college and going through geology and you start at the very beginning and you work through a progression, I thought there's no way that the two can match. There's no way that all that happened at the same time the Bible says, and I was in a real mental conundrum, but it does. It fits together perfectly like a glove, and we'll discuss that, and I'll show you how it all fits together great. We're also going to discuss, you know, was it really 24-hour days and how we know that it probably wasn't. And something I want you to keep in touch with or remember is that we have a saying in geology is that the present is the key to the past. So if you figure out, well, how in the world did that get there or how was that made? Well, you just look at something in present day and you can see that, and I always like to think of this as like a point bar out here on the Brazos River. You see a point bar, sandbar, which we call a sandbar. You know, how's that being made? What is the river doing to deposit that sand there? Well, it's the same thing that we find 4,000 feet underneath the ground when we find a sandbar there. It happened the same way. It takes the same amount of time to deposit that sandbar there as it takes today and in the exact same way. So, you know, that's one thing that you got to remember is that the present, what we see today is a good indication of what happened in the past. Now, let me say this. Could God have done it all in a blink of an eye? Absolutely. Could he have snapped his fingers and it all just appeared? Absolutely. Because when I was growing up, that's the way I was taught. Creation, there was no such thing as Big Bang. There was no way that it happened like the scientists are saying. It just happened. And that's the way I was taught. And that was my big conundrum when I went to college, to figure out how what they're saying scientifically versus what I was taught. And so I want you to know, yes, everything I'm telling you is probably the way that it happened, or it appears that's the way it happened, and we can kind of prove it scientifically. But at the same time, I acknowledge and can tell you today with all my heart, God could have snapped his fingers and done it just like that. But I don't think God did it in a magician-type way. And I think by not doing so strengthens us, strengthens our faith in him and what he's done in the past.
Hey, Randy, what's taught, sorry for getting you off track, what's taught today, like at a state university geology class? I wouldn't think it's the Bible, right?
Well, no,
I mean,
it's
so-
not. I don't know that the Bible's ever even mentioned
Yeah, so
at all.
is that what's taught, is the Big Bang type
Yes.
theories as far as?
Yes. The Big Bang theory, scientifically, and we're going to discuss the Big Bang here in detail, not in great detail, but we're going to discuss it, and you'll see exactly kind of what they're discussing in the universities now with no mention of the
But
Bible.
that's been taught in geology classes for
Yep,
100 years.
from the very beginning. Exactly. It's called the singularity. It's where everything started from a single point in time, and it went from there. A few other things real quick that I want us to discuss while we do all this over the next few weeks. And I want us to, we'll have a lot more discussion in the next weeks or so. Today I just wanted to lay a lot of groundwork. But I want to talk about the dinosaurs. We could talk about Noah and the Great Flood. Be happy to discuss Methuselah and his age. Was he really 986 years old? Why do we think that? Happy to talk about evolution and where does that fit in with everything. Maybe even talk about the Grand Canyon, how it was formed. And all this, of course, blending in with the Bible and what the Bible says and how that all meshes together. It's not just, we're not going to be having a science class, I promise. And then lastly, something that I might want, would like to discuss if you're interested is the end of times. How will the earth actually end scientifically? You know, what is it that's gonna burn us up? I mean, we've always been told that when the end time is here, we're going to heaven and the earth is gonna burn up and all that. Well, scientifically, how does it look like that may happen? Because we have a pretty good idea of what may happen there. There's something here in the end, real quick. I want us to learn. No, I'm gonna stop right there.
I think it's.
We'll just take this up next
Sorry,
time.
I'm helping you teach here.
No,
But,
please do. I want us to
I
talk.
think it's
talk.
fascinating that this is, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I'm not a science nerd by any stretch, but A, you're right, we didn't talk about it. We never talked about it. B, as technology progresses and we're in the age we are today, we know more about what's out there, and you might not get into this, than any group of people ever have known.
Ever on the face
And
of this earth.
It's amazing to me how just the vastness of, I got so many questions of, are there other life forms out there, you know, like us?
And we'll be
Are
talking
there-
about that too.
I mean, it's a great time to be teaching this because we know more now about stuff like that with all of our the space stuff going out there now. I mean, very generic on it.
Just the stuff.
But as far as, yeah.
The stuff in the space, but also here on our own Earth,
Yeah.
with what we have with geochem and seismic and things that we can see down into the Earth with that we've never had before. I mean, we know more about the inside of our Earth now than we've ever known at any point in time in our whole life, and we can see how things were developed down below that we didn't know before, which kind of matches back again to what we've been seeing and told about in the Bible. It's amazing. You're absolutely right.
Don't think you're boring. Don't think
Well, thank
it's
you
a
very
great,
much.
it's a good, great.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to do this. I've been wanting to do it for a long time, and it may be 2 or 3 weeks, and it may be a month or 6 weeks, just depending on how we get into it and how much y'all discuss and talk.
And then depending on how well it goes,